Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating document from 1980, right from the heart of the Cold War. And it makes a pretty explosive claim that the Soviet Union was systematically funding, training, and directing global terrorism as a weapon against the West. So, let's break down the evidence it presented, one piece at a time. Okay, so the first thing this report does, and it's pretty smart, is it tackles this very famous saying head on. It completely acknowledges that, yeah, the line between terrorist and freedom fighter can get really blurry. But it argues that for this analysis to even work, we need to agree on a firm definition. And this is the definition they landed on. To clear up any confusion, the authors of this 1980 report laid out this very specific idea of terrorism. Now, this is absolutely crucial, right? Because this definition is the lens through which they're going to present all of their claims and all of their evidence. So where does a story like this even begin? You might think with some bombshell leaked memo or a high-level defector, but nope. It all started with something much, much smaller. A single, tantalizing footnote in a CIA study. That footnote pointed to this staggering number, $200 million. And you gotta remember, this is 1980 money. Today, that'd be over $700 million bucks. The report alleged this was the annual Soviet budget for supporting what they called national liberation movements, groups that, it claims, were often impossible to tell apart from terrorist organizations. But why? Why would the Kremlin do this? Well, according to this source, the answer wasn't just some random, opportunistic strategy. No, it was deeply rooted in the Soviet Union's own history and its most important foreign policy goals during the Cold War. The report basically says, look, if you want to understand what the Soviets were doing in 1980, you have to rewind all the way back to the Bolshevik Revolution. It claims those early tactics of using terror to gain power weren't just a thing of the past. They became the playbook, leaving what it calls an indelible imprint on how Soviet leaders fought their global war against the West. And the report points to what it considers a key piece of evidence, a supposedly leaked secret speech from the Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev back in 1973. In it, he allegedly wasn't just cheering these groups on. He was framing them as calculated tools of foreign policy, specifically designed to shift the global correlation of forces over to Moscow's side. All right, so if that's the why, let's get into the how. How is the strategy actually put into action? Well, the report alleges it was all done through an extensive worldwide network for training revolutionaries. Now, just take a look at this list. What's really striking here is just how spread out these alleged training camps were. I mean, they weren't just inside the USSR. They were supposedly scattered all across Eastern Europe and even way over in Cuba. And the report claims these were all run under the direct supervision of either the KGB, the main Soviet security agency, or the GRU, which was its military intelligence arm. The report then zooms in on one specific place, Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. It cites a defector who basically described the university not just as a school, but as a primary pipeline for spotting and recruiting potential agents and saboteurs from all over Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And according to the source, this alleged recruitment pipeline produced one of the most infamous international terrorists of the entire 20th century. So the document presents the career of this guy, Ilyich Ramirez Sanchez, who you probably know better as Carlos the Jackal, as the perfect case study. It lays out this path from student in Moscow to KGB recruit to trained operative in Cuba as basically the blueprint for how this system worked. Okay, so training is one thing, but it's only half the equation. An operative needs weapons. So the next part of the report goes into detail on the alleged supply chain of sophisticated arms that was flowing from the Soviet bloc to these groups. And the report really tries to draw a direct line from specific advanced weapons to specific headline-grabbing attacks. It's not just about general arms supplies. It claims, for example, that the Czech-made Scorpion pistol was the very weapon used to murder the former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, and that Soviet-made SAM-7 missiles were used in attempts to shoot down civilian airliners. These weren't just battlefield weapons. They were allegedly being used right in the heart of Western Europe. And the report claims these weapons weren't just slipping through some back alley black market. It alleges there were direct shipments from state-controlled agencies, like Czechoslovakia's Omnipol, that went straight into the hands of groups like the PLO and even the IRA. So, this leads us to the next layer of the whole alleged operation. To maintain what we call plausible deniability, to keep their hands clean, the source argues that the Soviet Union didn't always act directly. Instead, it supposedly relied on this sophisticated network of surrogates and allies. The report lays out this alleged division of labor among the Soviet allies. Cuba, for instance, was supposedly the main training ground, especially for groups from Latin America. At the same time, you had East Germany's notorious secret police, the Stasi, who allegedly provided the operational intelligence, helping pick targets for attacks inside Western Europe. It was like everyone had their own specialized role to play. And in this web, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, is positioned as a critical piece. The report claims it wasn't just getting Soviet aid, but that it acted as a major international hub itself, training militants from groups as different as Italy's Red Brigades and Japan's Red Star Army. Now, to make that connection feel even more direct, the source points to a specific person, the Soviet ambassador to Lebanon, Alexander Soldatov. It alleges that Soldatov met with PLO chairman Yasser Arafat, on average, once a week, acting as the main point of contact to make sure Moscow and the PLO's operations were strategically aligned. So after laying out this massive, incredibly detailed web of allegations, from the money and training to the weapons and the proxies, this 1980s analysis doesn't end with some big final declaration. Instead, it ends with a really challenging question aimed right at the West. This is the report's final, provocative question. Why, it asks, were Western governments so hesitant to confront all of this? It suggests a few possibilities. Maybe it was a desire to protect the fragile policy of détente, that easing of tensions with the Soviets. Or perhaps it was about securing oil and pursuing peace in the Middle East. It's a question that leaves us to think about the really complex, difficult choices leaders face when they're confronted with state-sponsored violence, a challenge that is just as relevant today as it was back in 1980.